Okay, everyone, we are going to get started. First of all, Chodesh Tov to everybody. Be a good month with good news. With all the ups and downs in the world, at least there's still Rosh Chodesh and there's still Torah in motion. Okay, so I want to, in lieu of Rabbi Kelman, who gets a Mazel Tov, his daughter just had a baby, so he is not here. I would like to announce the sponsors of this series. We have two sponsors for the whole series. One's an anonymous sponsor in memory of Yisrael ben Aryeh Leib Zal climbing around sites in Eretz Yisrael. So hopefully we can see some sites in Eretz Yisrael in his memory. And the other sponsors are Naomi and Mark Chernin in honor of the IDF. May Hashem continue to give Am Yisrael strength and may we be blessed with peace. Amen. Okay. I am going to put the sources in the chat if you want to have them in front of you. And they'll also obviously be in the PowerPoint. Okay, let's get started with our learning. So we are now going to Second Temple times, right? Last week we did Tanakh times. Now we are going to Second Temple times by Shani. And we have many, many changes in the Jewish world between First Temple times and Second Temple times. We have changes in where Jews live. Okay, you have Jews living in the diaspora alongside Jews living in Eretz Israel, right? Something that starts towards the end of the First Temple period, but really takes off in Second Temple time, so that we have Jewish communities all over. These are things that we're not really going to talk about, but they're interesting to know about. By changing times, we have more individualism, more individual worship, more emphasis on individual learning, not only as a community. Okay, we have different emphases, right? We focus, as we're going to see, a lot on purity, a lot on the Beit Hamikdash. Okay, and in terms of things that we do wrong, right? It's always things we do wrong. They just change at different times. Okay, so if last time we talked about idolatry, okay, that's something that we're going to see has disappeared more or less, almost completely, really, certainly in Eretz Israel, from the Jewish world. However, we have other troubles, like a lot of sinat chinam. Okay, so we'll touch a little bit on that, but that's not necessarily going to be connected so much to the artifacts that we're going to do. Okay, today our artifacts both come from the same place, and it's a really fascinating place. And if you're in Israel, it's very worth stopping in and seeing it. It's a place that's been closed for quite some time for renovations, has now been reopened. And if you're recognizing the picture, this is what's called the Herodian Quarter by most people. It also is officially called the Wool Archaeological Museum. And this is part of the amazing, amazing series of excavations that happened in the Jewish quarter after the Six-Day War. We'll talk about that a little bit. And both of our artifacts are from this place. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Just to understand our timeline. Hey, we are not talking about the entirety of Second Temple times. We're basically talking about the last 100 years of Second Temple times. Okay, we are talking about the time period after the Hashmonaim come to power, right? So that's what we have here at the top, 164 before the Common Era. Middle of the 2nd century before the Common Era, Judah Maccabee defeats the Greeks. We have the beginning of Hasmonean sovereignty, right? Jewish control over the Holy Land for 100 years, okay, before the Romans come in. We have the whole Hashmonaid dynasty. Then we have the Romans coming to end a civil war between two of the Hashmonaim, okay? Just to give us a little bit of a sense of the larger world, the Roman world, right? 1st century before the Common Era, Julius Caesar is murdered, right? We have the whole story of Mark Antony and Cleopatra and the Battle of Actium and Octavian Caesar, right? So all the things that are going on in Rome, all of the upheavals there. Herod, right? We call our time period and our place, we call it the Herodian quarter. Herod's rule begins 37 before the Common Era, and he rules till 4 before the Common Era. So a lot of this time period is influenced by Herod, and of course he rebuilds the Beit HaMikdash. bringing us up to the Great Revolt, okay, 66 of the Common Era, which of course ends with the terrible destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and of Yerushalayim in 70 of the Common Era. Some of the things we're going to talk about continue through to the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 2nd century of the Common Era. And then we have a very large jump forward to the Six-Day War. Why? Because that's the catalyst, the excavations that we're going to see in the Jewish quarter. Okay, so that's just to give us a larger sense of time period. Okay, and some of the things we're going to talk about in terms of our second object are going to go all the way up to pretty much today. Okay, so just a minute about what is this place where these artifacts were discovered. Okay, so important to understand up until 1967, okay, as much as it might have been wonderful to be able to excavate underneath the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, underneath the Old City in general, it was impossible. Okay, up until 1948, Jews are living in Jerusalem, are living in the Old City, but it's very, very, very dense, and obviously you can't do excavations. After 1948, the Jordanians are controlling the Old City. Jews are not there, and it's only with the Six-Day War do we have both the ability, right? We come back, the Jerusalem is reunited, as well as the opportunity to excavate. Why do we have this opportunity? Because of the terrible destruction that the Jordanians create in 1948 in the War of Independence. They destroy, they blow up some of the major buildings, the Horva Synagogue, the Tiferet Israel Synagogue. They don't really build very much. And so when Israel comes back to the Jewish quarter, suddenly they see there's an opportunity both to build and to create a new modern neighborhood, as well as to excavate. And they start to excavate. The person who's in charge of this excavation is someone named Nachman Abigad, very significant archaeologist. And he and his team work basically from 1969, okay, until the early 80s, the same time that the Jewish quarter is being rebuilt, right, from street level and up, and also obviously sewers and things like that. They are excavating from street level and down, and they are finding things that range from Turkish times back to Mamluk, Crusader, okay, Byzantine, and going back to Second Temple times and First Temple times. Really unbelievable stuff. And one of the really exciting, certainly visually very exciting things that Avigad and his team discovered were a complex of 6 fantastic, beautiful mansions that got the name the Herodian Quarter. Today, these houses are underneath the Yeshiva HaKotel, right, which was built on top of it. And they give us a real peek into what life was like 2,000 years ago. Okay. These are houses that were owned by, on the one hand, people who were very, very, very wealthy, very influenced by Roman style and ideas. And on the other hand, people who are very invested in certain Jewish laws, namely purity, okay, mikvaot everywhere, okay, as well as being very against any kind of imagery, right? And you can see that here with our mosaics that are chosen, right? Contemporary mosaics from Rome or other places in the Roman world of this time show animals, show people, show gods. We have nothing of that here, okay? So that's just to give us a little bit of background. And without further ado, let's get to our first object, okay? And that is these very lovely cups, okay? Some
Oh, you
people who
got
look
them.
at them say, oh, washing cups, right? In scholarly parlance, they are often called measuring cups. Okay, are they measuring cups? Not likely. We know a lot of measurements in Second Temple times. Chazal talk a lot about different measurements. Think about what we say when we read the Korbanos, right? What we said in Musaf this morning, a hin and a revi'it and a log and a se'ah, right? None of these cups correspond to any of those measurements. So while people like to call them measuring cups, they probably are not measuring cups. But what are they? Okay, so they are cups. If you look at them, you should be able to notice that unlike most things that we see from the ancient world, most dishes and objects, okay, are made out of pottery. Sometimes more expensive ones are made out of glass. Okay, cheaper ones might be made out of wood, but this is made out of stone. Okay, stone, as we're going to see, not so easy to make things out of. We'll come back to that, but these are what make these unusual, make these different, and that's why we're going to focus on them as our object and see what they can teach us. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to take a look at, what do these stone cups teach us? And they're made out of, usually out of chalk or soft limestone. Okay, we're going to focus on something called an ethnic marker. Okay, what is an ethnic marker? Okay, an ethnic marker is a way to know what kind of a community lives in a certain place. Okay, so I chose two here that are a little bit funny, but you can think of ones that are very serious. Okay, but here, tell me you're Jewish without telling me you're Jewish, which is something that you see in various places, sometimes on social media. Okay, the one on the left is somebody's very over the top Pesach kitchen. Okay, archaeologists who excavated this in 500 years would say, what the heck? Why would somebody cover their kitchen with tinfoil? If you know enough about Judaism and certain, humras in Judaism, you'll say, okay, this is obviously somebody who is following the laws of Pesach. A much more common example, you wouldn't find such a thing in archaeology, but a much better example really is if you, but this was a better picture, was if you were to, unearth my mother's kitchen in 500 years, and you would find in that kitchen 5 sets of dishes, right? Why would anybody have 5 sets of dishes? Okay. And then you'd say, okay, this is either a person who really likes dishes or it's a person who is following certain rules, as in kashrut, milchik, fleshik, pesach milchik, pesach fleshik, right? It's an ethnic marker. The other one, which I brought in just for fun, this was my sister's, sent this picture to us, people who are stuck in Israel, stuck, so terrible being
Stuck.
stuck in Israel. But
Stuck.
when there were no flights for the past 2 weeks and people were having trouble getting in, getting out, this was one of the ads. There were all kinds of ads, some more legitimate than others, right? And this was an evacuation flight, Israel to New York. It took, what did it take? 2 full days, more than that, right? But what we liked about it, what we pointed out on it, was security escorted, lavish meals included, right? Who is that appealing to? Lavish meals included. So we said, tell me you're Jewish without telling me you're Jewish. Okay. But an ethnic marker really is just a way to be able to tell who is the community that lives there. Obviously, the easiest kind of things are a name, an inscription, right? A shul that says on it Beth Jacob, but we don't always have something like that. So we always want to be searching for something that is going to help us to understand who is the community that's living here. Okay, so in First Temple times, okay, um, we might have thought, right, and this brings us back to what we were talking about last week, maybe the presence of idols is an ethnic marker, meaning if we find idols, clearly these are not Israelite communities, Judaic communities. Unfortunately, as we saw last week, that's often a marker that these are Israelite communities, or they're really everybody's communities because everyone worshiped idols. So we have to look at other examples. Now, when I ask this question at First Temple or biblical archaeological sites, what's something that will show you that a site is Jewish? People will often say things like, okay, let's look for the mikvah, which is great in Second Temple times, not in First Temple times. We have not found any mikvah from First Temple times. Let's look for the shul. There are no shuls in First Temple times. Obviously, if we can find an inscription, that would be amazing, but we don't always have that. Okay, and this gets us back to the question we asked last week, which is, what do Jews do? What do Jews practice? Okay, so certain things seem to be relatively food proof. What do Jews eat and what do they not eat? So, as we mentioned last week, pretty unusual for Jews to eat pig. So, if we find pig bones, that's usually our ethnic marker. Not a Jewish site. Okay. Another one is, like we said, my mother's dishes. Okay. What types of dishes are there? And here you have jugs that have like this interesting little like sieve here, right? A strainer. These are beer jugs. Jews usually did not drink beer. We don't find these drugs at sites that we know for sure are Israelite sites. Okay, we do find them at sites that we know for sure are Philistine, are Plishti sites. Okay, so that's often could be an ethnic marker. What kind of dishes? What did people serve? Okay, another one is architecture. Okay, there are certain styles of gates that we find in Israelite towns, four-chambered gates, six-chambered gates. Okay, there's also a certain style of house, something that's called a four-room house that you see
Mouse.
here. Okay, four-room house, a center open courtyard, houses off to the side. We find this in big and small versions in Ir David and in Tel Sheva and in Tel Chatzor and so many places. There's an archaeologist named Avi Faust who suggests that these are really very Israelite, as in they ensure that we follow certain principles that are important to people who follow the Torah. One of those is Tuma and Tara. I talk about that in Bayit Sheni, meaning a woman who is a nida, a woman who has her period and can't come into contact with things in the house, can be in one room and you don't have to go through the other rooms. You don't have to go through her room to get to the other rooms. Everybody has access off the central courtyard, so she can stay in her room and not impurify anything else. The other thing Avi Faust talks about is as opposed to what we would call like a railroad flat, right? Where you go in and you have to go through one room to the next room to the next room, meaning who has the best room? The guy in the back, who's nobody goes through his room, but the guy in the front has the worst room. Here it's very egalitarian, it's very democratic. Everybody can go to their own room from the central courtyard. Now, the problem with these markers here is yes, they do tell us something about Jews, and they are found in sites that Jews lived in. But Eretz Israel is a small place. Pottery is traded from place to place. Architecture is learned from place to place. It's not foolproof. It's helpful, but it's not foolproof. Once we get to second time sample times, right, we have a little more clarity. Okay. First of all, Second Temple times, as we noted last week, we don't find idols. Okay. So if you have a site, for example, like Susita, right? It's on the eastern side of the Kinneret, pagan stuff everywhere. Okay. We know not a Jewish site. We don't have these idols. We might have imagery, right? Sometimes later on, we'll see that, but we don't have actual idols themselves. So that's already one ethnic marker. Other things that we find, okay, synagogues, okay, beginnings of synagogues in Second Temple times. This is one of the older ones in Gamla on the left here, okay. On the other hand, how do we always know that something is a synagogue? Often the same shape is used for a basilica, which is a pagan place of worship, later on for a church. It's not in Bayit Sheni times, but later. Could be that it's a study hall, a Beit Midrash, so we don't always know that something is a synagogue. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we have things that show us that. Um, One of the few foolproof ethnic markers from Second Temple times is what we see on the right here, and that's a menorah. Okay, menorah is the ultimate Jewish symbol. Okay, except who else uses a menorah who are not always considered Jews? Samaritans, Shomronim. So this is tricky, right? We want to find a really good foolproof ethnic marker. And that's where we get to our stone vessels. Okay, stone vessels, the only time and place, the only time, sorry, in the history of Eretz Israel where we find a very large distribution of stone vessels is this time period, the end of Second Temple times up till and including around the Bar Kokhba revolt. We don't find it before, we don't find it after. Why? Because it's annoying to make stone vessels. You don't want to make them. They're hard to make. They cost a lot of money. Hey, they're not expensive. They're not even particularly beautiful, right? If you want to spend a lot of money, create a beautiful glass utensil, right? Or very, very fine pottery. Stone vessels are a pain. We only find them in places that had Jews, and at this time period of the tail end of the Second Temple times, and right afterwards. Okay, and if you look at this map, right, this distribution map, first of all, we started discovering these already in the 70s. Okay, they started to be discovered by Avigad in the Jewish Quarter excavations. Right, that's what we saw. Our cups over there, or these dishes over here. Okay, and about 30 years ago, there was an article by Yitzchak Magen who wrote about how we find these stone vessels mostly in Jerusalem, mostly before the destruction of the temple. In the 30 years since that article, there have been many more excavations. And now we can really draw this map. This is a map that's drawn by a scholar named Jonathan Adler. Okay. And if you look at this map, it's a really interesting map because what does it show you? Okay. Where do we find these vessels? Okay. We find them many in the area of what we call Yehuda, okay, with a huge concentration in Jerusalem, okay, many in the Galil and the Golan, okay, some in the far south, what's called Idumea or Drom Har Hebron, the southern Hebron Hills. That's where we find the major concentrations. Where do we not find them? Very few along the coast, okay? And very few in the Shomron, okay? What does that tell us? Who lives where? Jews in Beit Sheni times live in Judea. They live in the Galil and the Golan. A few of them live in what's called Perea, Transjordan, Avar Yarden. Okay. They do not mostly live on the coast. Those are Roman, Greek, and then Roman cities. We have some Jews who are living in Caesarea, but it's not a huge concentration of a Jewish population. And they don't live in the Shomron. The Samaritans live in the Shomron. Samaritans don't follow these rules. Okay. 250 sites were discovered with these stone vessels in them. Okay. 140 of them in Judea, 65 in the Galil and the Golan. Okay. Very widespread and continuing after Churban Bayit. So this shows us where do these people find these dishes where Jews are living. Okay, so it makes it actually a really perfect ethnic marker. And second, anything else we want to look at over here? Just take a look at these dishes for a second. They are made in the same way that pottery dishes are made, that wooden dish, like it's the same styles, but instead made out of stone. Okay. Now, why? What's the reason? Why do we have this ethnic marker? Here's another great one, by the way, just discovered very recently in Jerusalem, in the city of David. There was another one that was discovered by Nachman Avigad in the 70s. He called it, it's for pitzuchim, right? If you live in Israel, you know what pitzuchim are, right? It's what you put out on Friday night, your seeds, your nuts, your dried fruit. It's really what it looks like, but we don't really know what it was used for. Why? Why are we finding these stone vessels? Because it's all about purity. Okay. The Torah gives us a list of things that if something happens, if there's something dead in the vicinity of these things, right? Take a look in Vayikra, wood, cloth, skin, sack, earthen vessel, it will be impure. If somebody drops dead in your kitchen, anything that's made out of pottery, anything that's made out of wood, anything that's made out of cloth, right? Pottery is gone. You can't make it tahor, you can't make it pure again. Okay. And all the other things become impure and have to be taken to the mikvah. What's the one, or not just one, but one of the few materials that's not mentioned here in the Pasuk in Vayikra? Stone. And Chazal take this, and Chazal say, if you look at the next source here, if you want the sources, by the way, they're in the chat. Maybe I'll put them in again if people missed it before. Okay. Gemara and Menachot, stone vessels, dung vessels, earth vessels, as in pottery that was not fired, are not susceptible to ritual impurity, neither by Torah law nor by rabbinic law. Meaning, somebody drops dead in your kitchen, the only dishes that are still good are the stone ones. Everything else has to go to the mikvah or be destroyed. Now, we see this in other places. We hear about it in the context of the Beit HaMikdash, certainly about preparing the ashes of the red heifer, of the para aduma. Right? If you have the Mishnah here, with kind of a crazy out there description of preparing the paraduma. They brought oxen upon whose back were placed doors, and children who had been raised in purity sat with stone cups in their hands. When they reached the shilach, they filled the cups with water. They ascended and they sat on the doors, right? To bring the water to mix with the ashes of the red heifer, you need this pure water straight from the spring with stone cups. Okay. Again, the Gemara in Yoma, but also talking about the paraduma, talks about the chamber of the stone house, okay? Beit Lishkat Beit HaEven. Why? Because everything associated with the red heifer was performed in dung vessels, stone vessels, earth vessels, only things that cannot become tameh, okay? So it's clear that stone vessels were used in the Beit HaMikdash, but they were also used by ordinary people. And that's one of the interesting things that Yonatan Adler talks about, right? He says when they found these vessels, right? If you go to some village in the Galil or in the Golan, you find stone vessels. They weren't found in one house or even in one neighborhood. You could say, oh, this is the Kohanim's neighborhood, or this is the neighborhood of the
Just a heads
Prushim,
up.
right? Of the guys who are following the rabbis. No,
Just a
they're
heads up. I'm gonna
found
be having a Zoom
throughout.
meeting in
Whoever
the kitchen
is
for my visa.
You're gonna
talking,
have a what?
please mute yourself.
I'm gonna be having a Zoom meeting
Oh, okay.
in
Mute
the
yourself.
kitchen.
I don't want to have to go out of
It's
the
about my
Zoom to
visa.
mute you
All right.
all.
It's gonna be very loud.
All right, let's see if we can do
Regular
that.
volume,
Okay. Thanks for
but
the
just
heads
a
up.
heads up.
Mute.
But regular volume might be considered
Here,
loud
I'm
for
muting
you,
all.
so
Okay,
I don't
good.
know.
Thank you. Yofi, except for me, right? I'm not muted. Yes, good. Thank you, Judy. Okay, so we're finding them everywhere, meaning everybody is using these things. Adler even suggests, interestingly, he says, quite sort of counterintuitively, we'd say, okay, who's using the stone vessels? The people who worry the most about purity, they're the ones using. No, he says, no, no, no. It's the people who are tamei, the people who became impure. They went to a cemetery, they had to bury someone, right? They touched a sheretz. They're the ones who get the stone vessels so that they don't impurify all the other dishes in the house, right? However we look at it, there's clearly a very, very strong emphasis on purity, okay? And that fits with what we know about this time period. Purity is the obsession, one of the defining elements of Second Temple times. And this is what we said before. Another major ethnic marker, Second Temple times, mikvaot, ritual baths. We find them everywhere. Okay, we have this Gemara. Come and see how far purity has spread in Israel. Parza Tarab Israel, right? Everything, and if you ever learn Mishnah or Gemara, you know that all over the place we're worrying all the time about, is somebody tameh, is somebody tahor, is somebody preparing their food bitahara, are you eating your food bitahara, right? The Kohanim who are eating their truma, everything is worrying about tahara, if you're pure, if you're impure, how does this work? Okay, and we find mikvaot all over the place. Okay, whether they're public mikvaot, okay, and that's what I brought you, this beautiful mikvah here of Derech HaAvot, right? Derech HaAvot, the path of the patriarchs, right near my house in Gush Etzion, which has these great staircases, right? A down staircase and an up staircase illuminating our Mishnah and Shkalim, the way down to the place of immersion, they are impure, right? If you have dishes that are on the steps, it's the same as the way down, it's not the same as the way up, right? So we have all these public mikvaot. We find them today in the excavations by the Kotel tunnels, tons of public mikvaot by the southern wall excavations near the Beis Hamikdash. We also find tons of private mikvaot. Okay, back to our Herodian quarter for a minute. You have luxurious, beautiful bathhouses, okay, but all of them have all these accoutrements of a Roman bathhouse, but with a little mikvah next to it, right? Tons and tons of mikvaot. And mikvaot are not just a defining element for Rabbinite Jews for Prushim, but they become very much kind of a sectarian element, right? Sectarian in the sense that they show you the differences between the different groups. We know that again, one of the very important things that's going on in Second Temple times is you have all of these different groups, people who follow the rabbis, people who don't, people of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the very early Christians, and for them, one of the points of contention is mikvah, meaning it's not really a point of contention. They all do mikvah, okay, but they do it for different reasons, right? If for the Chazal and for the people who follow Chazal, mikvah is a very technical thing, right? it takes me from a state where I'm impure to a state where I'm pure. I'm not bad or good. I just can't eat things that require me to be pure. We go to people like the Essenes, right? The guys of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is one of their mikvaot on the top here in Qumran, right? Josephus describes for us what they do every morning. They go to the mikvah, right? They go to work, they go to the mikvah, they eat, right? They don't eat until they go to the mikvah. It becomes something that goes from purely technical to technical, but also spiritual. And then when you get to the early Christians, right? That's from the New Testament down here. Jesus came from the Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. It's a spiritual thing. It's a completely spiritual thing. And that's what you're seeing in the picture on the bottom here. This is Qasr al-Yehud, the baptism site by the Jordan, where people are still coming today to be baptized. So just to summarize, our first thing that we learn from our stone cups is they're a great, one last thing. They're a great ethnic marker. They show us that these are Jewish communities because Jews are fascinated, obsessed, interested, careful about purity. Okay, one more mikvah here. Sorry. These are some mikvah were discovered. This is from the Kotel tunnels that are very, very, very shallow. Okay, you have steps going down, and this is the mikvah over here. It seems very strange. Clearly, a person cannot go in here. What is this used for? Two different suggestions. One is what it says here in the Mishnah, mikvaot, right? What if you have something very, very, very small that has to go in the mikvah, like a needle? Okay. Today we have those nice baskets that you dump in the mikvah kalim. Maybe they didn't have baskets, or maybe it was so small that it would float away in the basket. So what do? You move the water back and forth with one's hand, and a wave passes over it. So maybe you would put the object on one of these steps and sort of splash a little water on top of it. Another suggestion is the mikvah only for hands. Okay, if you're eating truma, if you're eating maser, you have to have your hands not just washed but immersed in the mikvah, according to the Gemara, the Mishnah in Chagiga. So maybe that's what this is for. Okay, two other things that we're going to say that we learn from our cups, and then we're going to go to our second objects. We learn about everyday life. Okay, and this Nachman Abigad expressed it very, very beautifully, right? Take a look at what he writes here in his book about these excavations. In our excavations in the Jewish quarter, we discovered a different Jerusalem, Jerusalem of the everyday, residences which we had never seen before. This is the uniqueness and importance of these finds. Our excavation uncovered a neighborhood of wealthy and powerful people. We saw this in the expansive homes, the decorative wall paintings, the colorful mosaics, the sophisticated baths, and the luxurious accoutrements of the wealthy, influenced by the styles of the Hellenistic Roman world. Okay, and that's what you can see here, this very nice triclinium, this dining room. Okay, so our cups and all the other small artifacts, and they discovered many, many small artifacts. The next object that we're going to see is one of those. They help us to paint a picture of everyday life for people who were not so everyday. They were very, very rich, okay? But they, on the one hand, very influenced by the Roman world. On the other hand, very unique in their being so careful about things like purity. Okay, and finally, the last thing we can learn from our cup is about the stone industry in Eretz Israel, end of the first century BCE, beginning of the first century CE. Okay, we know that Herod brings many, many Jews to work on the temple, right? Herod rebuilds the temple. He wants to do it very quickly so that there's no point where the avoda has to stop. And the Jews won't allow him to bring non-Jews into various parts of the temple. Plus, Jews learn how to do stonemasonry, and it becomes a Jewish occupation. Now, here's what happens. You leave your nice little farm, you hear there's work in the city, in Jerusalem, and it pays nicely. You go, you retrain as a stonemason. You work in the Beit HaMikdash, and then the Beit HaMikdash is finished, right? We know that there were stonemasons. We actually have one of these ossuaries in the Israel Museum today. It actually says on it, Simon Boneh Hechala, Simon, builder of the temple. This is something that he wanted to go down in history. That's what he did. Okay. Now the job's over. What are you going to do? You're going to go back to the farm? You're not going back to the farm. You have a new skill, but you need to use that skill. And you have all these guys who have a new skill. A market opens up for stonework. Okay. And that's where you get things like our cups and our dishes. And you also get a lot of these beautiful stone ossuaries, right? Bone boxes. This is how people were buried in Second Temple times. Okay, so you have stonemasonry, gorgeous things, and we've also discovered stone workshops, and that's where we get something really very interesting. Okay, already in the 80s, they discovered a big stone workshop in a place called Chizmet, just north of Jerusalem. 25 years ago, another workshop was discovered on Mount Scopus, the eastern slope of Mount Scopus. That's what you're seeing in the picture here. Okay, but also in the Lower Galilee, also in the Golan, meaning these stone workshops are everywhere. Now, it's actually a fascinating thing. What they discovered when they started to excavate them is that it's two things at the same time. It's a quarry that becomes a workshop, right? And it's very cool. You start to dig out the stone that you're going to use. You leave these big pillars so that the whole thing doesn't collapse. And then you have a very nice, cool, comfortable cave to work in. So it's both a quarry and a workshop. And what they discovered is hundreds, literally by this Mount Scopus one, literally hundreds of rejected pieces of stonework, meaning you made a mistake. You're not taking it to the garbage dump, you're just leaving it there. Okay, so you have hundreds of cups and plates, and they just didn't turn out so good. You're not going to be able to sell them. You have that, plus you have the insides, right? Remember a cup. You take a big piece of stone and you have to take out the inside in order to create the cup. Okay, so you have all the psolet, all the trash, and they just left it lying around there, and it's amazing. Plus the tools, right? We have some sophisticated tools. We have lathes, plus we have hand tools, and they really discovered these all over the place. Okay, one last thing about our stonemasons, and then we're moving on to our next object because we need to get there in time. Okay. Not far from this Mount Scopus stonemason workshop, in a site called Beit Pagi, which is on the slopes of the Mount of Olives of Har Hazeitim, in a burial cave. They discovered a lid of an ossuary, right? One of these, the cover, and on it was written, this was in 1910, this was a long time ago, a list of 23 names and their nicknames, okay, written in Hebrew or in Aramaic, and next to it, amounts. And we think this is maybe like a salary list. And maybe it's the guys who work in the stone workshop. We don't have any proof, but it's an interesting thought. Okay, so what have we learned? How do we know the identity of a site? Ethnic markers. We learned that purity is everywhere. We learned a little bit what everyday life is like, and we learned about stonemasonry. Okay. Number two, our object number two, a sundial. Okay, this is a very small sundial. Two of them were discovered in the Herodian Quarter excavations. Okay, this is a wristwatch sundial, right? It's very small, it's very portable. It's about 4 inches tall, 4 inches, 4 or 5 inches wide, and made of chalk. As you can see, it has these nice lines here, okay, radiating out from the center. It also has a place here where in sundial language, the gnomon goes, right? There's a stick here so that when you take it outside and you put it in the right spot, the sun will shine and a shadow will fall, and that will tell you what time it is. Okay, and that brings us to this is called in Chazal an Even Sha'ot, literally a time stone. Okay, and this brings us to our interesting second object we're going to talk about, time and how you tell time. Okay, so sundials are one of the earliest ways of telling time. We have them in Egypt, we have them in Greece, we have them in Rome. Okay, some people suggest that a massive site in the Golan of stones in a circle is called Ruja Mahiri is maybe like an early form of Stonehenge, maybe a very, very large sundial. Already in Tanakh, we hear about sundials, right? Chizkiyahu is very ill. He prays to God. Yeshayahu comes to him and says, don't worry, you're not going to die. You have another 15 years, and here's the sign that you're going to live, right? The shadow which had descended on the dial of Achaz, which seems to have been some kind of a sundial, will recede 10 steps, right? Instead of the shadow being at 11 o'clock, it's going to go back to 10 o'clock, and that's going to symbolize that Chizkiyahu has extra time, right? He turns back time. So a sundial is really a very intelligent, brilliant thing, right? Because all you need is the sun and a stick and somebody to figure out how to make the hours. And then the shadow that's cast, it's going to work all the time, right? You can actually see it nicely on this one, famous one in Yerushalayim, right? Called Zorei Chama on Rehov Yafo, right? Here's the stick. And here is the shadow pointing to 10 o'clock. Okay, another one here. All right, this is by the Gra synagogue in Shari Chesed. Okay, kind of a more, I don't know if it's more sophisticated, but it's more streamlined. Okay, and sundials are great. They don't need batteries. Okay, they always work. They have two disadvantages. Number one, it needs to be sunny. Okay, if it's a cloudy day or a rainy day, the sundial does not work. Number two, different at different times of the year, different seasons. The sun is in different places, right? Well, the earth is in different places, right? But it's not going to be as precise. But besides that, it's actually a very, very useful thing. Okay. So, what can we learn about our sundial and what can we learn about time in general in ancient times? Okay. So, first of all, we can learn about what makes our sundial different from others of its time and place, right? So if we go back, very, very simple. The other one has a little bit more fancy. It's got like designs of rosettes on the side, but just like we saw in the houses of the Herodian quarter, no imagery whatsoever, right? Contrast that to this really beautiful sundial from Athens from the same time period, first century of the Common Era. And you've got a lovely Helios, the sun god down here. And you've got, I don't know, Athena, Dionysus, I don't know which one is which. Okay, you've got gods, and that's a very likely thing, right? You have gods all over the place in the Greek and the Roman world, but particularly if it connects to times of the year, the calendar, okay, the zodiac. And if you go, so the place, Eretz Israel, Jews, we're not going to have imagery, but it's also very specific to its time. End of Second Temple times, Jews are very, very, very careful, not just about purity, but about imagery. No imagery. Fast forward a couple of centuries, 4 or 5 centuries, and you have images in synagogues. Okay, this is the Beit Alpha synagogue, and you have the ladies in the corner are seasons of the year. We have the zodiac for the months of the year, and in the middle, you have Helios, the sun god, riding his chariot. Can we explain this away? Yes, we're not going to do that now, but our sundial does show us something very specific to its time and place. Okay, so that's one thing we can learn from it. All right, next, let's talk a little about time. Okay, so first of all, how do people tell time? We'll get in a few minutes to who needs to tell time, because we're going to see most people don't need to tell time. Okay, but first, let's understand a little bit about how did people tell time. So you could have your sundial, right? Your sundial might be useful. However, if you're a person who is not in the upper class and you don't really need to know what time it is most of the time, you might not invest in a sundial. So how else can you tell time? There are times in the Jewish week, in the Jewish year, where you need to know what time it is. For example, Shabbat. Okay, so here we have a few great examples here. Okay, Gemara and Shabbos, Rava said to his servant, you who are not expert in the measure of the sages, when the sun is at the top of the palm trees, right, achama berosh ha'ilanot, light the Shabbat lights. Okay, so how can you tell? You can tell by the position of the sun even without a sundial. Just take a look at the sky. Okay, so his servant said, what we said about the sundial, what should we do on a cloudy day? So he says, okay, use nature. Okay, look at the birds, watch the roosters in the city. In a field, watch the ravens. You can watch the plants, right? We're not attuned, most of us are not attuned to this because we're not so connected to nature. But plants do open, close, turn, right? Based on the sun and close to sunset, right? I have a plant in front of my house, flowers, it's beautiful. They bloom in the morning. By the end of the day, that's it, they're gone. Okay, so you can use those cues. Okay. You could also measure time by how long it takes you to get from one place to another. Okay. And here we have a discussion about time in another context, the context of chametz, right? Chametz, how do I know when something is going to become chametz? Well, today we say, okay, you set that timer for 18 minutes. What if you don't have a timer? How do you know? Okay, it's the amount of time that it takes to walk. And we have two differences of opinion. Okay, in the Bavli, Gemara in the Bavli, the time it takes to walk a mil. A mil is a Roman mile. Take you like 20 minutes. Okay, that's pretty much that's the halacha today. We talk about the 18 minutes that something becomes chametz. The Yerushalmi in Eretz Israel, they said, no, 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 it takes longer, up to 4 meal, which is more like an hour and a quarter. Okay, but here's where you get something very interesting. Okay, the Bavli says the time it takes a person to walk from Migdal Nunya to Tveria, which is a meal. Okay, Migdal Nunya, we know today is a place called Magdala or Migdal. Okay, and to walk to Tveria, it's about 6 kilometers. Okay, or 4 meal. It would take you an hour and a half. So what is he talking about? Reish Lakish, he lives in Tveria. He knows where Migdal Nunya is. He knows where Tveria is. Why is he saying it's a meal? It's not. For that, we have to go to the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, hey, that same distance, Migdal Nunya to Tveria, is 4 meal, and that's how long you need to wait. But the Bavli didn't know where these places were. They said, no, 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 it's not 4 meal, it's 1 meal, but they took the names of the places and they said, it's 4 meal, but it's not. We know it's not. Okay, so sorry if that was a little confusing. Should have done that a little bit better. Okay. Time. Okay, when you read the Gemara, you learn about halacha, you know that there's all different kinds of ways that we talk about time. And a lot of them are compared to Roman ways of talking about time. Okay, so for example, Romans talk about the hours that are before noon and afternoon. We use these terms today. They talk about the ante-meridian and the post-meridian, as in AM and PM. Chazal do that too. We're going to see. The Chazal talk about if you have a witness who shows up and says, I saw something in the 5th hour, as in before noon, and another guy who says, I saw it, the same thing, but I saw it in the 7th hour, as in afternoon. Those things don't get confused. Everybody knows the difference between morning and afternoon because of where the sun is. Okay. The Romans also divide the day up into 12 equal parts. Okay. In the summer, each of those parts is long. In the winter, each of those parts is short. Chazal do the same thing. They talk about sha'ot zmaniyot. Okay. In the summer, an hour can be 75 minutes long. In the winter, an hour can be 45 minutes long. This is a Roman idea and it is a Jewish idea. Okay. The Romans talk about a civil day, it goes from midnight to midnight, and a natural day goes from sunrise to sunset. Chazal do this too. Sometimes we count from the night before, sometimes we count as in a full day, 24 hours. Sometimes we say only from sunrise, different things depending on different halachot, as well as watches of the night. So Roman time and Jewish time can be very similar, right? But used for different purposes, obviously. So one of the things that's very interesting, Romans talk about watches of the night. The watch, right, as you can get from the name, or the ashmoret in Hebrew, like from shomer, comes from when guards would switch in the middle of the night, right? You do guard duty. Anyone whose kid is in the army knows, right? You go on your guard duty from 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. and then someone's supposed to come and relieve you. Same always, right? But these ashmorot, we see them all over the place in Tanakh, in Chazal, right? So we have it in Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? At the morning watch in Ashmoret Haboker, God looks down on Machane Mitzrayim. We have it in the story of Gidon, right? When does Gidon come on the Midianites? Say Rosh Hashmoret Hatichona, at the beginning of the middle watch. If you think about that as a military tactic, that's brilliant, right? When are people the most spacey, the most out of it? Changing of the guard in the middle of the night, right? Not at the beginning of the night where people are more awake, not at the end of the night where it's almost daybreak, beginning of the middle watch, the Hashmoret Hatichona. Okay. different context, Eicha, right? Kumironi balayla lirosh ashmurot, the beginning of the watches. And this is something that later on we have something called tikkun chatzot, waking up in the middle of the night, right? In order to cry over the Beit Hamikdash, shivchi kamayim libech nochach pnei Hashem. Okay? Chazal talk about this idea as well, right? The very, very first Mishnah in Shas, when do you start saying the Shema and when do you end saying the Shema? Me'ematai korina tashma ba'arvit, misha kohanim nichnasim le'achol b'trumotam, okay? When the kohanim come in to eat their truma, meaning it has to be after sunset because they may have to go to the mikvah, ha'arev shemesh, ad sof ha'ashmura harishona. Rabbi Eliezer says till the end of the first watch. And the Gemara in Brachot says there are watches for the angels who sing all night, and humans have the same watches, but we have signs for them. Right? What are the signs? In the first watch, the donkey brays. In the second one, the dogs bark. And in the third, people begin to rise, to wake up. A baby nurses, a wife converses with her husband. It's actually a very neat way to think about the night. Right? I remember reading years ago an article which talked about, we worry all the time about our sleep and the quality of our sleep. Certainly in Israel in the last 2 weeks, right? We want an uninterrupted 6, 7, 8 hours. We certainly were not getting that. And somebody wrote an article about how, that's not normal. All throughout human history, people would wake up. They would wake up, they would talk, they would go eat something, they'd go back to sleep. Okay, I'm not saying this is good and we don't want missiles in the middle of the night, but maybe this is a more normal kind of a thing. Okay, very important halachic time. Bein hashmashot, between the suns is how Chazal talk about it, or we call it twilight. This is a very important time. Things that you can't do then, very important in connection to Shabbos and Eruv, okay, connection to Tahara, right? When do you become Tahor? So we have definitions of this Bein Hashmashot. Ezoi Bein Hashmashot, in the Gemara and Shabbos, we have 3 different definitions. One is the color of the sky. Again, nobody's going out and looking at their sundial or their watch because this is too precise. It doesn't show up on the sundial. So one of it is the color of the sky. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda says lower segment of the sky has lost its color. The upper segment has not lost its color. That's Bein Hashmashot. If the upper segment has lost its color and its color equals that of the lower one, that's night. Okay, very nice, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nechemiah says, no, let's go back to our definition of walking. If you can walk a half a meal after the sun sets, that's how long it is. That's the time of Ben Hashmashot. After that amount of time, it's already nighttime. Rabbi Yossi says, no. You can't be so precise. Twilight Ben Hashmashot keheref ayin. It's like the blink of an eye. Ze nichnas, ze yotze, ve'i efshar la'amod alav. One enters, one leaves. You can't figure it out. Okay. Very, very interesting, right? How do you see this? And we know in Israel, because we're not that far from the equator, right? If you go places like, I don't know, northern Canada, England, twilight can be a very long time between sunset and nighttime. In Israel, it's fast, right? Sun goes down, it's dark very, very, very soon afterwards. And that seems to be what Rabbi Yossi is talking about. Very interesting. The Gemara goes on, and we have Rabbi Hanina, who says, if you want to know what this Rabbi Nechemiah says, a time to walk a half a meal, you should do the following. Leave the sun at the top of Mount Carmel. Okay, Yaniach Chama Birosha Carmel is like a really funny image. And that's what I brought you here, a picture of the sunset from the top of Mount Carmel. Descend, immerse in the sea, and emerge. That's Rabbi Nechemiah. Now, this is a very strange statement, right? Rashi says, you're on the top of the mountain, you run down Mount Carmel, you go into the water at the beach, and you run back up. There's no way that's the distance of a half a meal, which we already said a meal is like 20 minutes, that's 10 minutes. Doesn't make sense. And so we have another explanation which says Rabbi Hanina comes from Tzipori. He says, as you're walking from Tzipori to Tveria, you get to Poria, which is above Tveria. You look back, the sun, you can see the Carmel from there. The sun is at the top of Mount Carmel. You have time at that moment to go down to the Kinneret. The Yerushalmi says Yama Shel Tveria, okay? And to even go into the water before Shabbat, right? Before the sun's going to set. Okay, back to our sundial. right? And this is where we get to something else that we want to learn about. What does the sundial teach us? Who needs to know what time it is? Okay. Today we are used to our cell phone and our Apple Watches and our, Google clocks, and we know exactly when, right? We make a meeting for 10:37, right? We set the alarm to go off at 5:42. We know exactly what time it is at every moment. I'm looking at my watch as I'm teaching you because I know I've got 6.5 minutes left. Nobody
Yeah.
cares in the olden days. The sun comes up,
My
you wake up.
appointment's in about 30 minutes, so you do have
Okay.
time. But if possible, when it starts, can you lower
Didn't
that a
I
little
mute
bit?
you all?
Just because
What happened?
it's interfering a
I'll be
little.
able to
How
speak
did you
to in
unmute
30
yourselves? Okay. Fine. The sun comes up, I go to work, okay? The sun goes down, I come home, I eat something, I go to sleep. Nobody needs to know what time it is except for very, very few people, okay? One of those major exceptions is the one that our object belongs to, and that is Kohanim. Kohanim and Leviim need to know what time it is. Why? Because working in the Beit HaMikdash, the avoda is very time bound. Okay, you need to do certain things at certain times, so you need to have some way to tell time. Now we have our sundial. We also have on Harabayit itself, we have ways to tell time. So we hear in the Gemara in Yoma, Queen Helene, right? Helene Hamalka made a nivreshet, a golden chandelier above the entrance to the Mikdash, to the Heichal. When the sun rose, right? It's facing the east. When the sun rose, sparks of light would emanate from the chandelier, right? Everything would become full of light, and everyone knew the time to recite Shema had arrived. Okay, so it is the sun, but it's something that is augmenting the sun. And in the Mishnah in Yoma, the appointed priest said to the other priests, go out and see if it's day, if the time has arrived, right? And the time for slaughter, the time to do the korban of shacharit. If the time has arrived, the observer says there's light, barkai. Why did they need to see this? Because once the light of the moon rose, they imagined that the eastern sky was illuminated with sunlight, and they slaughtered the daily offering before its appropriate time, right? So when you do, sometimes we're misled. The moon is very bright. Okay, it's a cloudy day. We need a way to know what time it is, and that's very important for the Kohanim and the Leviim. Not only that, they need to tell other people what time it is, and that's where we get to this great combination of the Gemara and Shabbos and an inscription that we found at the southern wall. The inscription says Lebeit Hatkiah. Lahach, Lahav. This is a drawing of what it might have been. Okay. And the Gemara talks about how there was a Levi who would blow on a trumpet before Shabbat so that people would know it's time to stop working. It's time to close your stores. It's time to light the Shabbat candles. Okay. And he sounds a Tekiyah and a Truah and a Kiyah, and he accepts Shabbat. So Shabbos and the Beit HaMikdash, you need to know what time it is. Okay. Who else needs to know what time it is? Oh, sorry. You need to know what time it is for Pesach. Okay, we already talked about chametz. When your dough becomes chametz, we also talk about when you have to stop eating chametz, right? Here we have from the Lakewood Weekly, Sof Zman Achilas Chametz 1023. Nobody knew from 1023. Okay, we have opinions the fifth hour, the sixth hour. How do you know when those hours are? Okay, Rabbi Yehuda said 2 disqualified loaves of a Todah thanks offering are placed on the bench in the colonnade in the temple. As long as the loaves are placed there, everyone continues to eat chametz. One of the loaves is taken away, they neither eat nor burn. When they're both are taken away, the entire nation began burning. So you have to have a sign. People don't know. The Kohanim are responsible for the sign. Finally, who else needs to know what time it is? Okay, the courts, right? If you have adim, if you have witnesses that come and say, I saw somebody murder somebody else, you have to question them, and you question them and you say, what time was it? Right? Again, he doesn't have a watch, but what can he say? Say the time was 5 hours. How does he know? Because he's looking at the sun. If one, you question the two witnesses separately. If one witness says 5 hours and the other one says 7 hours, can't be, right? Maybe they'd confuse 4 hours and 5 hours, but 5 hours, 11 o'clock for our purposes, and 7 hours, 1 o'clock, you don't confuse them. Sun's in the east, the sun's in the west. Okay, those people need to know more or less what time it is. Okay, lastly, and we're going to do this quickly because we don't have time. We don't have time, get it? Okay. Time can be used differently by different people. The easiest way for a sectarian group to separate themselves is to have a different calendar, a different system of time. Here, we're not talking so much about time of day, but really time of the year. Okay. And we know that already in Tanakh, okay, Yeravam, who makes his own breakaway kingdom and makes his breakaway mikdashim, he creates breakaway holidays. Okay, he makes the holiday on the 15th of the 8th month, as in Cheshvan. He makes his own holiday. Chizkiyahu wants to unite the people again. He makes his Pesach in the month that's Iyar, because he knows that's the month that the people in Israel in the north were making their Pesach. The sectarians, the Essenes, the Stukim, they made their own calendar. We have this very unusual, very strange sundial that was discovered in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were. We don't know exactly what it means, but we think it's like different based on different times of the year. The Essenes had a completely solar calendar. They didn't have a lunar calendar. So this is a way to break away. Okay. This is a way to create your own group that is not going to connect to the group that the majority group. And that's why we have very much of an emphasis in the Mishnah on when Ktzirat HaOmer happens, right? To take it out of the idea of the Tzdukim, who have a different date. We have an emphasis on Rabban Gamliel forcing Rabbi Yoshua to follow his calendar, right? Because we don't want the Jewish people to split into two. Finally, we have outsiders completely, and that's the Romans. And this is just nice for anybody who's learning Daf Yomi, because this was the Daf today. Okay. We have outsiders whose time we don't care about, but we do care about, because we need to know when their holidays are so that we don't engage in business with them. We won't go into all the holidays of the Gentiles. Anybody who's interested in this can look at my article on Hadran, which came out today. We don't have so much time for it now, but what have we learned from our sundial? How did people tell time? How did you divide up the day? What's similar to the Roman ways of telling time? Who needs to know what time it is and who doesn't need to know? And how does timekeeping differentiate your group from other groups? Okay, and we have just enough time to look at the chat and see. Okay, 3 sets of dishes, dairy, meat, and Chinese, fine. Mount Zion mug. These cups are very common all over, right? We find them in tons of places. I don't know what the Mount Zion mug is, but we definitely find them in lots of different places. So if you want
Shulie,
to
if you look
enlighten
at
us,
Biblical Archaeology Review for this
okay,
issue, you will find that it's not just a mug, it's an inscription that is cryptic that we don't know how to read at this point. And it
okay,
seems that some scholars feel that this is based on a sect, SECT, that was prevalent in Qumran as well, perhaps the Essenes. So
interesting.
the language or script that it signifies had to be written and deciphered in a certain way that only a few had an
Okay.
idea of. Interesting
I
article.
don't know about
In-
this, but I will look. Thank you.
Interesting article if anyone gets a chance to see it.
Okay. What is an earthen vessel? Earthen vessel is pottery that's not fired. I don't know how useful such a thing is, but I'm not a potter. Why was Tara not a big issue in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash? It's an interesting question. Look, I feel like every time period has things that are important to them. Okay. Today, the Orthodox world is obsessed with kashrut. Okay. Look at kashrut even 50 years ago, people were much less crazy about, oh my gosh, is it this hechsher? Is it that hechsher? They'd eaten different, not that they didn't keep kosher, but it wasn't something that was a focal point.
But
Tara seems to be the focal point at that point, and probably connected to the Beit HaMikdash. But yeah, it's an interesting question, not an al regel achat kind of question. Did the emphasis on Tuma continue after the Churban? Right. So that's a very interesting question, right? Because as Yonatan Adler points out, we find these dishes in places that are, we know, chronologically post-Khurban. Okay. Now, they sort of disappear sometime in the 2nd century, but we find mikvaot all the way into the 3rd and the 4th century. So fascinating. Why not the dishes? I don't have a good answer. Okay. The shilach and the pool was an outdoor mikvah, correct. Women's and men's mikvahs, we don't have anything that tells us that that mikvah were separate for separate sexes. We assume that they were used at different times. So far, we don't know more than that. Okay. Erev Pesach, right. So we had this. This is before I got to this. The markers may have been constellations. Zella, very interesting concept. I never heard that, but cool. Meaning you're looking at the stars and it looks like a donkey or cool. Very nice.
That they needed information that they could only get from the skies.
That's very nice. I mean, I think it could be both. It could also be, a physical thing, but that's very nice. We have to see if somebody actually talks about that. Sleep cycles, broken sleep cycles. Yes. Okay. Anybody else?
No.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I hope we have a quiet Shabbat and a quiet next week. And Bisorot Tovot and Chodesh Tov to everybody. And see you next week.
Amen. Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank
Terrific.
you. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov,
Terrific.
Yashikoach,
Thank you.
Shulie, Yashikoach.
Thank you.
Yes, Koyach. Brilliant.
Thank you. Chodesh Tov, Shabbat Shalom.